Well, it's like, why is Australian housing is so expensive? Essentially, it's showing of how well the Australian economy has been doing over the last 15 years. We have had 15 years more or less of an uninterrupted economic growth during which average earning has been raised by close to 90%. While over the course of that period, the standard variable mortgage rate has roughly halved. That meant that the amount which a typical home buying household can afford to borrow under rules which aren't strictly applied as they used to be had more than doubled. Over the same period, rising immigration and falling average household size has meant that the number of households looking for accommodation has risen by about 1.5 million. That's around 200,000 more than the number of dwellings has increased by. So, you have had a substantial increase in the purchasing power of households. No net increase in the supply of housing enhances all that additional purchasing power has gone into pushing up the price of housing.
Humans are faced with many challenges, one of which is climate change. An experiment was conducted on the environment and climate in the 1930s when people first noticed climate change. Humans have been trying to change their lifestyles to deal with it, but the observation of climate change is difficult from area to area. A method is introduced to help understand the mechanism of the climate system. Researchers predict that temperatures will increase about 2 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. What's less certain is what rising temperatures mean for the planet. Some climate models predict subtle changes. Others forecast rising sea levels, which could flood coastal areas around the world. Weather patterns could change, making hurricanes more frequent. Severe droughts could become more common in warm areas, and species unable to adapt to the changing conditions would face extinction, although much remains to be learned about global warming. Many organizations advocate cutting greenhouse gas emissions to reduce the impact of global warming. Consumers can help by saving energy around the house, switching to compact fluorescent light bulbs, and driving fewer miles in the car each week. These simple changes may help keep the Earth cooler in the future.
With us in the studio today is Dr. Gavin Matter, child psychologist and author of Raising Kids. So I'd like to start by asking about children and their attachment relationships.
Yes, well, first of all, let's look at what attachment is. And basically, it is closeness with another human being. And it's important for us, as adults. We are programmed biologically to connect with other people and form emotional attachments. You just need to think about how devastating it can be when our closest attachment relationships are severed, or even just threatened. As adults, we can be devastated and we may even tailspin into depression or illness. Now, looking at children, recent research shows that an optimal environment for child rearing was achieved in hunter-gatherer societies. And what you have in those societies is not isolated parents living in a nuclear family setting, separate from extended family, from clan, from culture. What you have back then is much broader parenting arrangements.
It takes a whole village to raise a child.
Yes, exactly.
Well, employers are currently experiencing a love-hate relationship with social media. Some are using it to their advantage. They're reaching more customers, increasing sales, and improving their brand image through social networking sites. They're also using them for recruitment. On the other hand, many employers continue to see the bad side of social media and believe that it poses a threat to their business. Negative comments online can damage a brand, and employers also worry that employees might spend too much time online during working hours, stopping them from working effectively and completing all their tasks. But this problem provides employers with an opportunity. Employees who spend a lot of time on social networking sites do it because they're bored. They don't feel challenged and want to fill their time. This suggests that employers should take a more active role in providing development opportunities for their staff and setting new goals. This way, they can benefit from the advantages of social media without experiencing the difficulties.
Listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class. The professor is talking about stating laws in the science of psychology.
Psychology is a relatively new science. Like other sciences, psychology must be able to state laws. A law is a way of organizing knowledge about something so that we can make predictions. When enough knowledge is gained about a subject, a scientist can state precisely what will happen under certain conditions. We experimental psychologists are interested in developing laws about human behavior, so we'll be able to understand and predict what people do and why they do it. Of course, to develop laws about human behavior, we must assume there's some regularity to it. We can't be psychologists without making the assumption that behavior follows certain patterns. One of the major laws psychologists have discovered is called the law of effect. The law of effect states that whether or not a person will repeat a behavior depends on the effect that behavior has. If an action is rewarded, it's likely to be repeated. If the action is not rewarded, or if it's punished, it's not likely to be repeated. How do psychologists state laws? First, using available knowledge, a psychologist makes a hypothesis about behavior. Then, the psychologist tests the hypothesis through an experiment. But even if the experiment proves the hypothesis,
I have a problem with my political science class. Literally, I know nothing about it and regret taking it. I should have dropped the class.
Calm down, Jane. Students take classes to learn.
I know, but I am so clueless. I am just not so into the politics, constitution, and laws. And again, the words are so confusing to me.
Jane, let me tell you something. Based on my experience, you just need to try. You know, the words may sound difficult, but they are not at all that difficult. Once you get familiar with the vocabulary, basic laws, and events, political science is a very interesting and easy subject. On top of that, you have me to help you.
Do you really think so?
Yes, I'm sure. Everything's up to you. If you think positively and put effort into it, everything will become easy.
In places where there's been serious community tensions, Brickenden's a good example of this. There were 250 reported incidents there in 2009, often to do with neighbours and arguments, but criminal activity too. And the police will tell you that if you leave residents to sort things out for themselves, the number of incidents rises, it doesn't fall. So the local council realised that they had to do something. So they went round to people's houses and met them and their neighbours and talked to everyone and got a general idea of what the local concerns were. If there were extended families involved, they looked at those particular families more closely and all the relatives and got some of the family intervention services to talk to them. And there were some very positive results. You can pick out the hotspots, the main areas for crime. But the hotspots don't tell you what causes the crime in the first place, and so don't address the issues. So this proactive, more direct approach by the council worked well. And this was followed up with other quite practical solutions like cleaning up the area, getting rid of debris in alleyways and just making the place somewhere more agreeable, more livable.
A further example of endangered species is the shark. Around 40 million sharks are killed each year. That's quite a lot. Consequently, the number of sharks is decreasing. So let's take a closer look at the causes of this. Firstly, in recent decades, sharks have become important. This is largely due to the growing popularity in some parts of the world for the consumption of shark. It has become a very valuable food source. OK, so maybe you're thinking, well, lots of other fish like cod, salmon or tuna are caught for human consumption and they aren't disappearing at the same rate as sharks. Well, that's true, but the difference here is sharks are not able to repopulate or reproduce themselves quickly like the other types of fish that are commonly fished as a food source. Why? Because sharks are slow breeders. Sharks mature slowly and it takes them years to reach the age for egg production, and then they produce only a few eggs, so that means just a few new sharks. Humans have a 9-month pregnancy or gestation period, whereas some shark species are thought to have extremely long gestation periods, as long as 3 years. This makes them much more vulnerable and in danger of dying out than many other fish species.
Many different types of barcode scanning machines exist, but they all work on the same fundamental principles. They all use the intensity of light reflected from a series of black and white stripes to tell a computer what code it is seeing. White stripes reflect light very well, while black stripes reflect hardly any light at all. The barcode scanner shines light sequentially across a barcode, simultaneously detecting and recording the pattern of reflected and non-reflected light. The scanner then translates this pattern into an electrical signal that the computer can understand. All scanners must include computer software to interpret the barcode once it's been entered. This simple principle has transformed the way we are able to manipulate data and the way in which many businesses handle record-keeping.
Now that story's been scorched, as only part of contingency planning. But it was a symptom of the dramatic turn of events in South Australia, and it flushed out other remarks from water academics and people like Tim Flannery, indicating that things were really much worse than had been foreshadowed, even earlier this year. So is Adelaide, let alone some whole regions of South Australia, in serious bother? Considering that the vast amount of its drinking water comes from the beleaguered Murray, something many of us outside the state may not have quite realized. Is their predicament something we have to face up to as a nation?
As Joanne pointed out, only one country, tiny little Bhutan, wedged between China and India, has adopted the gross national happiness as the central index of government policy and actually has had a good deal of success in education and in health and in economic growth and in environmental preservation, and they have rather sophisticated way of measuring the effects of different policies on people's happiness, but they're the only country to go that far. But you're now beginning to get other countries interested enough to do kind of white paper policy analysis about whether happiness research, what effects would it have we used it more for public policy. You're beginning to get to countries like Australia, France, Great Britain that are considering pushing regular statistics on happiness, so it's beginning to become a subject of greater interest for policymakers and legislators and different advanced countries.
A Venezuelan oil minister once referred to his country's main export as the devil's excrement. We'll see how the death of Hugo Chavez affects production levels of this Faustian fuel, which influences both the global oil market and the climate. Venezuela's oil has problematic qualities. The thick, tar-like oil requires extra heat to flow. Once finally on the move, it's fed to refineries where the heavy oil must be what the engineers call cracked. That chemical process removes excess carbon and readies the oil to be turned into the petroleum products we all use, from gasoline to plastics. The extra carbon, known as pet coke, is often burned and is more highly polluting than even coal. These issues affect more than Venezuela. The Keystone XL pipeline is a bid in part to bring oil from Canada's tar sands to some refineries on the Gulf Coast that can handle it precisely because they were built to handle Venezuela's tar mix. If more Venezuelan oil begins to flow, the Keystone pipeline might prove extraneous. But whether Canadian tar sands or Venezuelan heavy crude, more thick oil means more CO2 in the atmosphere. And that means a climate ever more hellish. Carbon-based life forms, here on this planet, are eventually going to destroy. Regardless of where one's soul goes, one thing is guaranteed. A vessel we call a body is going to undergo some unpleasant metamorphosis after the death of the human. Without life-sustaining processes like blood circulation and metabolism, the human body begins to degrade, skin falls away, eyeballs disintegrate, and hair and bones turn to dust. Worms and bacteria that live in soil love to feast on decaying material like
One of the most amazing things that have happened event in my lifetime is the prediction of cosmology. When I started out 48 years ago, we thought we knew that universe began a Big Bang. Some people doubted.
physics is a key subject to understand the world and the universe.
native speakers are exempt from language tests in their own language.
All medical students must clean their hands before entering the room.